Welcome to Walk in the Shadows with me, your host, Tim Woolworth. This is episode 4 of the second series of our podcast, a series dedicated to exploring the mystery of psychic detective work. After listening to the growing number of cases we've examined, it should be abundantly clear by now that there is something quite mysterious in the world of psi. Some people seem to have the ability to pull information from an invisible source, a source unknown to most of us that provides exceptionally accurate information about people, places, situations, and things that should be unknowable. In the case of psychic detective work, this mysterious information can be life-changing for both individuals and families. Yet there is still a lot of resistance to the work of psychic detectives within police departments, even after people like Irene Hughes and Nancy Myers-Zatley have shown collectively on over 3,000 cases that the work of psychics can be important to solving crimes. It should be noted that these are just 2 psychic detectives, and there are thousands working today with varying individual degrees of success. In this episode, we are going to examine the case files of another psychic detective, and to round out the complexity of this topic, we'll examine psychic detective work through the lens of law enforcement agencies. If the following content intrigues you and you need to hear more, there are bonus episodes in this series for our Patreon subscribers to listen to at their leisure. With all topics we cover, the Walk in the Shadows bonus episodes expand upon the concepts in each season. For access to our bonus episodes and several other perks including free merchandise, please visit our Patreon. The link is in the show notes. If I may have one more ask before we get to the good stuff, like and subscribe to our podcast. If you really vibe with what we're doing, please leave a review and tell a friend or two. It really does help. And now, we'll continue our exploration into the perplexing mystery that is psychic detective work. As we've seen from prior episodes, psychic detectives can be a boon to the police departments that utilize them. But with the use of psychic detectives comes exceptional precautions. When sensitive information is critical to an investigation, law enforcement simply cannot allow just any psychic detective to have access to case files. Some departments therefore fully vet a psychic detective before using them on a case. A good example is when a police department tested psychic Irene Hughes with a human skull, or when another Chicagoland police department tested her using photos of impossible perpetrators. This is a common tactic that police departments implement when bringing in a psychic to help on a case. It is important to know how legitimate a psychic's abilities are and if they have the supernormal capabilities to solve crimes. Even with vetting procedures, not all police departments are willing to embrace the work of psychic detectives. When a psychic detective approaches a police department with a vision or a tip, many are simply turned away without a second thought. This can be for several reasons, including that the police in question don't know the psychic, or that there may be an inherent disbelief in psychic visions. We must remember that police are trained to be skeptical and suspicious to have the necessary detachment and focus needed to solve cases. It's quite possible that any police that the psychic encounters may think that a psychic is not necessary to solve a case. And in a practical sense, there are time constraint and budget considerations to be had. All of this set aside, one of the more prominent reasons that a psychic is not utilized is that there is also the high risk of facing public backlash to the department if it becomes publicly known that a psychic has been used on a case unsuccessfully. Following a psychic's tip can require extra manpower for searching and investigation. If a police department designates time and resources to a psychic tip and it does not pan out, the wasted resources may have been put to better use trying to solve the case with traditional methods. One famous case where exceptional manpower was used unsuccessfully based upon a psychic's tip was a search for an honor student. 15-year-old Robert Peast was the last of Chicagoland serial killer John Wayne Gacy's 33 victims. He had met with Gacy for what seemed like a routine job interview and simply disappeared. When Peast went missing, the police followed up with Gacy, and they uncovered what would become one of the most notorious serial killer cases of all time in the United States. But it took almost 2 weeks from the death of Peast to Gacy's arrest and confession. In the interim, the police were actively trying to find Peast. Des Plaines Police Lieutenant Joseph Kozenzak worked with a psychic named Carol Broman to find Peast. Broman was introduced to Kozenzak via his wife, who was taking a parapsychology course with Broman. When Broman was brought in on the case, the police decided to protect her identity, along with the credibility of the police department, and specifically Lieutenant Kozenzak, by ensuring that all information gained from Broman was to be credited to an anonymous caller. According to Kozenzak,
obviously, all psychically obtained information must be corroborated to the extent that the case can stand entirely on the corroborated evidence. If a question is ever raised as to what led the investigator to the evidence, his standard reply is, a reliable, confidential informant.
Having psychometric abilities, Kozenzak gave Broman 2 of Peast's items to hold onto, a radio and a camera. When holding his camera, which was quite dear to him, Broman stated in a wavering voice that, "No, he isn't alive. The boy isn't alive. If you don't mind, I'd rather not go through how he died. I'm getting sick to my stomach, which means there's a lot of unpleasantness. Murder is always bad, but sometimes it's worse than other times, and this time it's one of those. You're going to find, when you find this boy, 6 or 7 others in the same place, the same area. It's very much like the case in California where the man, a homosexual, kept the boys and one of them got away, and he then dug up all the boys." Broman had made a mistake. It was the serial killer Dean Corll in Houston, Texas, not California, that murdered 28 young men and boys and buried most of them under his boat shed in 1973. After Gacy had confessed to Peast's murder and had shown the police where he dumped the body into the Des Plaines River from the I-55 overpass, the Peast family was wrought with pain. They wanted to find his body and requested the famed psychic Dorothy Allison. Allison had worked with law enforcement agencies on thousands of occasions to help solve crimes, including the Patty Hearst case and one other notorious serial killer case. Allison had provided the New York City Police Department with the accurate description of the Son of Sam killer, formerly known as the .44 caliber killer. It was that same description that became the sketch that matched the Son of Sam killer, David Berkowitz. And just as Allison had predicted, Berkowitz was caught due to being ticketed for a traffic violation minutes before his last murder. He had parked his Ford Galaxy illegally in front of a fire hydrant before shooting his last victims. Dorothy Allison was known for her astounding abilities and had received copious amounts of press and commendations on her successful psychic detective work. She had solved over a dozen murders and located at least 50 missing children. It was because of her reputation, Kozenzak agreed to extend to her the tools of the Des Plaines Police Department as long as the Peast family picked up the tab. The police drove Allison over 1,000 miles around Chicago. In exploring the areas where she thought Peast's body may lie, the police department utilized investigation equipment like dogs, helicopters, boats, excavators, and divers as they investigated vacant lots, a solid waste incinerator, a dirt hill in a cemetery, and a few other locations. Ultimately, Allison's psychic visions yielded no results. Peast's body was found in early April by a passerby, entangled in roots by the Dresden Dam in the Illinois River, almost 5 months after becoming a victim of the Mad Clown of Chicago. That being said, it should be noted that neither Allison nor Broman turned up Robert Peast's body. But there were striking similarities in what they had stated about the case that proved true once Gacy's confessions were obtained and Robert Peast's body was located. More importantly, Allison predicted the exact day that Peast's body would be found. Kazenzak believed that Allison's intuition was a real help despite it requiring so much manpower to obtain no actionable results. He said that,
"Psychics did not solve the Gacy case. They did lend to it in providing investigators with some pertinent information regarding the location of John Wayne Gacy's last victim. Had weather conditions not been prohibitive, it is possible that Dorothy Allison may have found Rob's body. During the course of the investigation, the law enforcement personnel who worked the closest with information acquired from Broman and Allison came to believe in psychic phenomena."
The key question for most police is not whether psychics are real, but whether or not they can help in furthering solutions of cases. These were the words of Dr. Marcello Truzzi, who wrote a fantastic book on the subject of psychic detectives with his co-author, Arthur Lyons. Truzzi named the ability to solve cases by detectives the blue sense, and he asks law enforcement agencies to look at the blue sense for
utility rather than its validity.
In this series, you have heard about fantastic cases where a psychic detective's use of the blue sense's utility has been proven through validity. But it's not just civilians that have this ability. Did you know that there have even been police officers who have found their calling as psychic detectives? For example, in Tioga County, New York, Deputy Sheriff Philip Jordan has been profiled in the National Law Journal for his psychic detective work in 37 states. As a testimonial, James Coons of the Addison County Sheriff's Office in Vermont has spoken highly of Jordan, stating that
He's located a lot of missing persons. His big thing is bodies. He has a documented track record that's very credible. We might be able to use him as a contributing factor to probable cause as the basis for a search warrant.
Obviously, that statement about probable cause was hyperbole, due to the United States legal system not recognizing the testimony of psychics as evidence. But since that statement was made by a police officer, about a police officer, it does accentuate a point very well. Psychic detectives have validity. Despite validity, using a psychic detective as a tool is still highly unorthodox in the view of physical investigation. Many police departments will not acknowledge that they use psychics due to the fear of negative blowback. Considering that psychics are still stigmatized and misunderstood by the public at large, it's no wonder that police departments avoid publicly using psychics and the stigma they create. Most psychic detectives are used away from the public eye, even at some of the most respected offices of investigation in the United States. According to the FBI, officially they do not use psychics, but they certainly do on an unofficial basis. You and I will not hear about the cases that psychics have worked on from the FBI itself, but you have heard about two cases already. Nancy Myers Zetley with the Jonestown Massacre, and Dorothy Allison with the Patty Hearst case. At the local level, to avoid stigma, some police officers have admitted to working with psychics to help solve cases unbeknownst to their own department colleagues or even their superior officers in order to avoid criticism. For example, the officers who worked closely with Nancy Myers Zetley were subject to harassment and hazing. These officers were serenaded with the theme from the Twilight Zone. At other times, dead bats or crystal balls were left on their desks and in their desk drawers. It was not easy in the department. The officers that worked with Nancy were bothered every day about asking her to pick the next track winners or lottery numbers, or to have her speak about any extramarital affairs in the department. along with other things to denigrate her use. At the police station, the officers were even reprimanded by their superiors for working with what they considered a flaky housewife. They had to hide their work with Nancy by meeting her at her home or other clandestine locations while covering her expenses out of their own pockets. She was so accurate that it was worth the extra cloak and dagger to be able to solve cases faster. Luckily, the field of psychic criminology is starting to gain a modicum of acceptance in law enforcement. There are police departments that have started to implement policies to regulate the use of psychics. There have been psychics, like Noreen Renier, who has lectured at the FBI Academy on the use of psychic detectives in an investigation. The California Department of Justice produced a report on the police use of psychics and concluded that
a talented psychic can assist you by helping to locate the geographic area of a missing person, narrow the number of leads to be concentrated upon, highlight information that has been overlooked, or provide information previously unknown to the investigator.
Even one of the most prestigious law enforcement journals available, Police Chief, had an article that stated,
individuals with bona fide psychic ability offer a unique and potentially valuable investigative skill.
Most departments will only work consistently with psychics that are not publicity hounds and can be trusted with the case details. Keeping out of the public eye is important, as the public stigma is very real. And as this continues, psychic detectives will continue to be underutilized. As police departments move forward with embracing psychic detectives, it becomes imperative that they look past fears of public ridicule and criticism, and more towards the beneficial use of a psychic detective. This requires diligence, as procedures and protocols need to be drafted, and this can only be done with research and man-hours dedicated to exploring how to properly use a psychic detective. If there is no structure in place, their use will be haphazard and unreliable. Once a structure is in place, it is critical to have an officer that works with the psychic. The officer needs to have a positive attitude, as there is a correlation in psi between the attitude of the experimenter and the results obtained. Police Chief Magazine even commented upon this, saying that the officer involved should be
fairly open-minded in regard to the existence of psychic ability. It must be remembered that while most psychics expect some skepticism concerning their abilities, hostile or overt skepticism may divert their attention and ultimately decrease their effectiveness.
Finally, finding suitable psychic detectives is a must. Many departments use psychic detectives, but only when a case is fresh and has a chance to be solved with a couple additional clues that are just outside the reach of the investigators. A psychic detective needs to be able to be trusted with the confidentiality of facts, the officers they work with, and the outcome of a case. In return, the police department must assure the psychic that their identity will be sealed to provide security. A suspect cannot be arrested nor convicted upon information gained from a psychic, so they never have to testify in court. And as Kozenzak stated, if the information was ever called into question, police simply have to say it came from a reliable, confidential informant as a standard reply. With all this in mind, we can see that the use of psychic detectives is slowly moving towards the mainstream. As police journals write about the efficacy of psychic detectives, officers go on record with anecdotes about working with psychics, more case files are closed due to psychic tips, and more police departments continuing to use psychic detectives, the easier it is for law enforcement agencies to not only accept, but to actively seek out the use of psychics. Soon Irene Hugh's vision of a psychic detective branch may truly come to fruition. What hasn't changed yet is the public perception of psychics. The metaphysical has been a field full of graft since time immemorial, and it still is today. There are numerous phony psychics and cold readers who make a very good living peddling nonsense. Unfortunately, legitimate psychics are lumped in with this lot. Currently, there is not much that can change this, other than the continued work of legitimate psychics, along with the tincture of time. As I found in my research on this subject, the press loves to publish stories about the work of legitimate psychics, especially when they help on numerous cases and build a reputation. Good press demonstrates to a wide audience that psychic detective work can solve unsolvable cases. It appears that the ability to solve cases can be even more powerful when legitimate psychics band together as a group to work on case files. There have been several of these super psi groups in the United States, but none were more successful than the one founded by psychic detective Beverly Yeagers. Sometimes psychic detectives can tune into the location of a crime. Others can feel a connection with the victims. Some psychics can even pick up on the motives of a crime. These things can come via visions from beyond, speaking to the deceased, dowsing, or even psychometry. One such case of psychometry in ESP involved a psychic named Beverly Yeagers. Yeagers began as a non-psychic who actively started researching ESP in 1962 due to an interest in the topic. She continued to read and attempted to unlock her psychic abilities. She eventually trained herself to become one of the most recognizable psychic detectives in the history of the United States. Yeagers firmly believed that ESP is a skill that does not require spiritualist beliefs, occultism, nor mediumship. Yeagers may have been right, as both the United States and Russia have a decades-long track record of teaching select people the ability of remote viewing, which, according to the CIA,
is a psychic technique which permits a viewer to transcend time and space to view and perceive people, places, or objects, without the viewer being physically present.
As her abilities grew, so too did her reputation. Yeagers was well known at the time in St. Louis for her psychic insights, and she gave private readings regularly. The case that put Yeagers on the radar of police departments throughout the Midwest was the disappearance of a woman named Sally Lucas. The police had no suspects and no leads on the case, which was moving full speed ahead towards becoming a cold case. With the case progress stalled, one of Mrs. Lucas's family members contacted Yeagers and gave her some of Mrs. Lucas's personal effects to read. Yeagers received some strong visions from these items that had not been covered in the press to date. With support from the family, Yeagers talked to a reporter from the St. Louis Globe-Democrat about her feelings on the case. She had a vision of Mrs. Lucas's car very close to a large body of water. Less than 24 hours later, police in Florida had located Mrs. Lucas's car abandoned less than 50 feet from the Gulf of Mexico. This directly led to a man being charged with abducting Sally Lucas, but she was nowhere to be found. The reporter called a friend on the police force and told the officer about Yeagers and how she had seen the car in advance. If Yeagers truly could get information from an unknown source about the case, maybe she could help the police locate Mrs. Lucas. The reporter was met with laughter. Eventually, the police officer concluded that it couldn't hurt to try. The police officer contacted Yeagers and invited her to sit in Lucas's car without telling her what case it was involved in. Yeagers sat in the driver's seat, gripped the steering wheel, and images flooded over her, like a movie playing in her mind's eye. Yeagers projected her feelings out loud as they were happening, and the officers wrote them down. Yeagers immediately knew it was Lucas's car and that she was murdered. She described the murderer, a description which matched the man arrested in Florida for the kidnapping. Yeagers also had impressions. She saw a bridge, horses, and the letter C. All of these things panned out in the case. Lucas's body was found near a bridge on a road called Horse Creek by two highways, Highway C and Highway CC in Missouri. Yeagers was able to see the crime, and it affected her so much with physical pain, she had to leave the vehicle to make it stop. As a result of the vision, she had a map of everything in her mind. She traveled with the police to a state park about 40 miles outside of the city. The weather turned and it made looking for Mrs. Lucas quite difficult. When the situation cleared up, Mrs. Lucas's body was located in an overgrown area by the creek, precisely where Yeagers said it would be. In another case, Yeagers was contacted to locate a missing person in Missoula, Montana, by the name of Hope Sage. Hope had been missing for years, and Yeagers was only supplied with her name, nothing else, via a telephone call. Yeagers concentrated and had a vision where Sage had walked up a mountain near her home and had died there of a stroke. When her vision was followed up upon, a skull was found on the mountain behind her home. Analysis by the Smithsonian Institute confirmed that the skull came from a woman around Sage's age. It should be noted that Sage had left a suicide note in her home, but there was no evidence of foul play on the skull. Yeagers went on to form what she called the Psychic Detective Bureau, also known as the Psi Squad, in 1971. The Psi Squad's sole purpose was to work with the police and was comprised of psychics who all had different types of abilities. The Psi Squad would not seek cases nor publicity. They would only work on cases if asked directly by a police department. Yeagers and her Psi Squad were often tested when working with a new department. Sometimes, a psychic will say that being tested is an affront to their gift, and that they do not need to be tested as they have proven their abilities in the past. Yeagers had no problem with being tested, and thought that those who opposed it were problematic. No psychic evidence should ever be accepted without healthy skepticism. Yeagers once said,
"I am the biggest skeptic in the field."
The Psi Squad worked on hundreds of cases. Yeagers eventually obtained a private detective license and has taught courses on psychometry in St. Louis. She believed that anyone could be taught ESP, especially those with a higher IQ, because they are the quickest learners, and cops, because much like psychic detectives, they are trained to follow hunches. This episode was researched and written by me, Tim Woolworth. The final audio engineering and creative soundscapes are from my fellow explorer of the unknown, Joshua Shawn from 0G ITC. Hopefully this episode made a little bit of our paranormal world more normal for you. As always, if you have any personal anecdotes, observations, or alternate explanations you would like to share on this or any other topic we've covered, or just maybe you would like to drop a note to tell us about any encounters you've had with the unknown, you can always reach us via our email, contact@walkintheshadows.com. Once again, that's contact, spelled CONTACT, @walkintheshadows.com. If you want to learn more about this podcast or myself, please visit our Walk in the Shadows website. The link is in the show notes. On our website, you can find the resources used for this series, our social media accounts, our mailing list, and our Patreon should you decide to support us. Your support directly helps us keep high-quality paranormal content delivered regularly to the podcast player of your choice. If you're so inclined, another way you can support us is by simply subscribing and reviewing this podcast. And please, tell a friend or share on social media. It really does help. Most importantly, thank you for your time spent walking in the shadows with me. I know your time is valuable, so I really appreciate you being here in this moment. Until next episode, may you and yours be healthy, prosperous, and treated with kindness by everyone and everything you meet, both in the light and in the shadows.